Hello and welcome to the Woman Show. I'm Lenina Rasool, and today I'm so excited to be in conversation with Dr. Sindiwe Magona, who is a writer, storyteller, playwright, and activist. Dr. Magona and I are going to be in conversation about her new book, I Write the Yawning Void, and we're going to look at the importance of women telling their stories and also writing their stories, and what it takes, including courage, for you to write yours. But before that, we're going to have a look at a short video with some thoughts from Dr. Magona about reading, writing, and storytelling. Let's have a look.
We can cultivate reading, a culture of reading, so that everybody or most people who will read, not everybody is going to be, but more and more people should be hooked into reading. By making books that are enjoyable, but then by giving them to people who actually open them and read them, and then by having structures in place where children and their parents get to see that they are being measured. Measurement is important at the beginning of any huge movement. We need a movement of books and reading. Books matter. It's for me so sad that when we talk about nation building and other good things that should be happening in this country, we don't really act on that. You know, it would be so easy, for instance, for the relevant departments. Children are the business of the Department of Education, the Department of Health, Welfare Services, at least those three. When there's trouble, of course, the legal system also comes in, but those three is basic. How come they cannot come together and say, for our children, let's get a book where all children this age read the same book in this country, so that by the time they get into higher education, university or any tertiary institution, they have some things, some basic things they can share, the stories, South African stories.
Welcome back. You're still watching The Woman Show, and I am so proud and happy and honored to be in the studio with Dr. Sindiwe Magona, who is a writer, storyteller, speaker, activist, who has written countless words. I keep describing her as a literary icon of South Africa. And Dr. Magona, thank you so much for being in studio and for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you.
Dr. Magona, just so that everybody knows, I'm super excited about this conversation today. So excuse me if I just I'm bolder than usual. Dr. Magona, when I invited you onto the show, I realized it's been 1 year since we connected. Last year, the day after you turned 79, you came to a dialogue around reading and writing and women's literature that we had held. And now you have just turned 80. You have just birthed another book, which is titled I Write the Yawning Void. And, you know, one of the things that touched myself and all of the other women that was at the dialogue was your story. I watched a TED Talk this morning. It was interesting because you started it by saying that at 23, you were a has-been. And now at 80, you are a literary icon. You have a doctorate, a PhD. You have lived in New York. You have worked for the UN. And I wanted to start the conversation by asking about what is the middle of that story?
What's the middle of any story? It's the point in a life where you have to look at your life, look at it dispassionately, and see the rift between hope and reality. That's the point I had reached in my mid-20s, 23. Between 23 and 25, that was a long moment, a long day to look at my life. and see it was nothing near what I had hoped. In fact, it was more than the direct opposite of what I had hoped of my dream. Not that I had any huge dreams, mind you, because one of the legacies of apartheid, legacy of oppression, is that it actually made people who look like me have very small dreams. Not only did oppression put you down, it even put down your soul and your mind. You never could dream big. Who was there showing you what big looked like in people like you? But even those smaller nyana dreams had been dashed by 23. But I had 3 children, my own. And coming from very humble origins, neither of my parents had completed primary school. Neither, in other words, had a certificate of education. But one thing they drummed into our heads, all 7 children that they had, was that if we had any hope of escaping the quagmire in which we were growing up, education was the key. To the girls, her daughters, my mother said, education is the only husband who will never leave you. That for me was the turning point, finding myself husbandless, with children, jobless, in a country that not only, or because it did actually, deny me what is a universal birthright, citizenship. As a non-citizen in this country, I could not apply for help from the government that denied my existence. There you are, 23, 3 children, no help. So those 3 little people, those 6 little bewildered eyes looked at me. And to see hope and love from your children and know you have nothing to give them. I, who had come from parents who belonged to a class that we supposedly educated, looked down upon amataba, the uneducated. But they had done so much for me. And there I was at 23, educated, and I had nothing to offer my children. That struck me to the core of my being. I had to find a way out of destitution. I grew up poor, but in my mid-20s, I went from that to destitution. That's when, as a trained teacher, yes, with no matric, Bantu people could be teachers with no matric. Everybody else had to matriculate to train as a teacher. But if you are being educated for littleness, you don't need matric. I had to turn around and do domestic work, do scrub sheep heads, scrub cop. I've been there, have done everything you can to earn a living so I could feed my children. There was no grant for me. I look back now and I look at the grant system. I'm not so sure. I wasn't lucky. There was no grant for me. So I was forced to turn on myself and find in me the means to scramble out of poverty. No change can happen in a life unless that life is instrumental in putting together that. Your life will never change if you don't do anything to change your life. Nobody is going to change your life for you. You are the main instrument in your life. And that was the lesson I had to learn.
Wow, Dr. Magona, that is very moving. And I also wanted to ask you, so then you say you went through, you did matric through distance learning, and that's where you started.
Yes, because I realized that if I had matric, because there was this law in education, all color skins, not only black. If you were a married woman, you were the last to hire and first to fire. So I realized, I looked around the 13 primary schools, lower and higher, that were in the then Bantu townships, Langa, Nyanga, and Guguletu. In the mid-60s, those were the only 3 townships for Africans, for black Africans in in the Western Cape. I looked around in the 13 schools, only 2 teachers, both male, had matric. And I saw a gap. I thought, if I have matric, married or not married, I will get a post. Guess what? 4 subjects, half matric, I got a post. The fact that I was married, still married, although didn't matter anymore, I had matric. That matric certificate, when I got, even before I got it, but that ensured employment. Make yourself employable.
I love that. You know, a lot of the narrative that we are hearing right now that stops people from going after something. They have a spark of a bigger dream and they do not feel worthy. And I love your story because you speak a lot about legitimacy in terms of what is or what is not expected of people by the way that they look. And I have to tell you, a few weeks ago, I watched a documentary about a famous basketball player. And he's short. He's now broken a world record. But he is short. And the documentary, when it starts, he says nobody wanted him. He had to divert from the path that he had planned for himself because he did not pass the eye test. And the eye test for recruiting basketball players is tall, is bulked up, and so forth. And there was one person who saw his talent and then, gave him a chance. In a tiny, there's a scene where he says he was so happy that he was chosen to be part of a team, but the happiness soon subsided because when he told everyone, no one had heard of this, this very tiny university.
Yeah. You have to start somewhere.
And so when people think about that, and I think when we judge ourselves through the eye test, what are your thoughts about that? And how did you be able to transcend that?
The lesson that I had to learn was that what I thought about myself, what I thought of myself was more important than what other people think of me. What matters is believing in me. What matters is loving me, embracing my dream. And it doesn't matter that other people don't understand it. My one rule about what I do is that as long as I don't plan to hurt another, what I do is my business. When I started studying, people were laughing at me in my street, at the bus stop. What are you holding? That looks like books. I'm hiding this paper bag. Yes, it's books. What are you doing with books? Don't you have children? Yes, I do. Yo. Kathi ndiyazibona ndiphethe incwadi ndawugqiba uba nabantwana. Where would I see myself holding books when I have children? Who said books and children are a clash? In fact, they are a match. If you have children, you should hold books all the time with your children. Books are part of life. They enrich life. They inform life. If I had listened to those people laughing at me, where would I be? Trust yourself. Trust your gut feelings. And don't mind what anybody else says. How is what I'm doing hurting you? It's not.
Dr. Magona, in your TED talk also you speak a lot about, you map this journey and you say, I didn't do it alone. And you speak about all of the people throughout this process that helped you. Now, you've just spoken about some of the people who mocked you. And what we speak about a lot in the show, because I find women who do take a stand, who do decide to follow a dream, what happens prior to that is a lot of backlash. We see, especially activists, there is a lot of trauma associated with the backlash that we get, with the people that's telling us we're unnecessary, or we are looking for attention, or we are full of ourselves, or who do we think we are? And I've had women on the show who have heard that from their families, who have heard it from their partners, who have heard it from the ministers at their church when they are trying to do something good. And so we know that this happens.
Yes.
I want to ask you, during that time, what kind of support helped you to face that backlash and to move forward instead? And I think what I'm also trying to say is that for me, myself, this morning, I thought that we are so programmed to hold on to the painful experiences in our life, and maybe what we need to do is think about the good that's also done in equal measure to keep us strong.
I had lots of help. Nobody in the world stands alone, whether you want to admit it or not, know it or not, recognize it or not, is the truth. We are who we are because of the connectedness with others. I'm the second born in my family, the eldest of the daughters. We had, he's late now, a bigger brother. He taught me love of books, reading, and things like that. But one of the things he said when we were in Guguletu, the first time we lived in close proximity with people with glass windows who can stand inside and look at you walking outside and pass remarks, or you see and you know it's not friendly, it's not complimentary, whatever it is they're observing about you. You know, he would walk, and if he saw the curtain flip, he would stand and look, give them enough opportunity to satisfy themselves and then march on, do what he's doing. And he said, when a dog barks at you, you don't go and get down on all fours and bark back at the dog. Let the dog do dog business. Go ahead and live your life. In other words, don't mind comments from people who don't know who you are, don't care who you are. Know who you are and what you do. From my family, even with the children, having people to look after the children when you're busy studying, that kind of thing. That was real support. Neighbors, that was the time you could trust your children to neighbors. So I had that. And then I had, the other kind of support, financial support, scholarships, little things. People saying, I'll buy your books for you. So that was, the late Raymond, recently late Raymond Ackermans. I remember one year, they had the scholarship advertised. I called, they called me to their little office, somewhere in Claremont, and I told my story. They bought my books, they paid my fees that year. And so I wouldn't be where I am without that kind of support.
And I think that's so important that we look at all those things. I think some of the most motivational pieces, and I've read recently actually, was women coming onto Facebook saying, I never thought that I would get something like this.
Yes.
But I decided to apply anyway, just taking a tiny chance.
Look at the scholarship I got to go and do my master's at Columbia University. We were not allowed, Bantu were not allowed into libraries until 1990.
Wow.
Public libraries were not for us. But through an organization called SACED, South African Committee for Higher Education, that came into existence after the tertiary education institutions were closed to Bantu, were segregated according to skin color. They came in that organization to help people who wanted to study through correspondence. Yeah, their offices were at the top of the Christian Institute in Mowbray. And that organization helped me because they found ways to attach circuit students to UCT, and because we were kind of maybe UCT students via circuit, we could then access public libraries. I'm at the public library in town, and I see right there a notice, attention, the scholarship, blah, 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 blah. Applications are closing on the 30th of September. That was about 2-4 days. And I thought, who do you think you are? Then I thought, they won't kill you, apply anyway. I took down the details, I applied. I was called for an interview. Plain Street, Cape Town, where the USA had offices, And I went there and I got an interview, and I remember being interviewed, and somebody who taught at lectured at UCT said, if we should give you this opportunity, what would you, and you go and study, what would you come back after 2 years and do for your people? My gut feeling was, my people are down there not because of what I did to them, but I thought, you want the scholarship, give us. So I said, right now I belong to this youth organization, that church organization, that women's group, that, I was doing things in Guguletu already.
Yeah.
There's no reason that says I would come back and disassociate myself with these entities. However, for me, the most important thing that would happen if I went away and came back with a master's degree is that in the 3 townships here, nobody who looks like me has a master's degree.
Yes.
The fact that children in those townships would see me and say, someone who looks like my mother, like my auntie, has a master's degree, maybe I can have a master's degree. I think that's why I got that scholarship.
That's fantastic. Dr. Magona, I love that we are ending the first segment only on that note, but we have to take a short break, and we'll be back with more after this.
Thank you.
Welcome back. You're still watching The Woman Show, and we are in studio with literary icon Dr. Sindiwe Magona, who is a writer, storyteller, speaker, activist, and we've been having such a great conversation, Dr. Magona, about your journey, about believing in ourselves, about taking chances, about positivity. You've just released a new book, I Write the Yawning Void, and I haven't read the whole book yet, I must say. But I managed to read one of the essays, which was called Clawing at Stones, and it was extremely touching. And it speaks also to, I think, for me, it speaks to the importance of writing our stories, about all of the stories of women, and especially African women, that are missing. But I want to read just a piece that I pulled out, and I'll say why this resonated. You wrote that I was in my 30s before I ever held a book written by a Black woman in my hand. That was Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Now I am in my 50s, because this was published in 2001, and have read a few more such books, not as many as could be reasonably expected given our numbers. However, for reasons too many, too painful, sickeningly familiar and inseparable as resin from bark in our lives, the vast majority of African women and women of African descent have yet to tell their stories. And that was so touching for me because I am exactly half your age. I've just turned 40. And what's interesting is that across those 4 decades, for me also in my 30s was the first time that I'd consciously held stories of Black women, and was also Black women from the US. So Maya Angelou was one of them, with Audre Lorde. And I remember feeling intense anger, actually, because I thought, how is it possible in this day and age that I have not had, I think, sort of free mainstream access to literature by Black women, that I've had to go through almost 4 decades on my own, experiencing the things that I'm experiencing with no greater context, when that context actually exists in literary form. And so I wanted to ask you, with your vast generational experience of writing, of publishing, of media across many different forms, what are some of the barriers to us writing, to women writing their stories?
You know, it's been said that of all oppressed people, the black woman is the most oppressed. Oppressed by skin color and by gender. So you will not find such a person busy writing stories when they're scurrying around looking for a potato to put in the pot. That is why the poor don't write. Either they don't have the skill, they have the stories. They don't have the skill, they don't have the time, they are not at leisure to write. You need leisure time to write. And that's not given to a lot of women, irrespective of skin color. A lot, that's why there are more male writers in the entire world than female writers. Also, you need a wife to write. Most women don't have wives. You need somebody to take care of every other business in the home. You need free time. That is not given to a lot of people. You have to find the time to write. Having written, few as they are, because they have been dismissed from the consciousness of the world. Nobody goes around looking for black women writers or their books to read. If you go, maybe it has changed in the last 5 years, here in this country, in South Africa, if you went to any bookshop, and I mean the big ones, at the back you'll find novels, fiction, non-fiction, novels, plays, whatever. And then at the back, black books. And those black books are books written by people who look like me. Separate category. And then among those, you'll find the male writers first before you come to books written by women who look like. There was some noise made about that a couple of years ago. Maybe that has changed. I haven't had the courage to go back and check. So we don't write because A, we don't see people who look like us write. And the few who dare write don't get read. And if your books are not read, you will soon disappear from the scene, because writing is a business, not for the writer mainly, but for the publisher. Publishers are there to run a business, and if they publish you and your books don't sell, they are not likely to publish your next book.
I've heard it said, and even I think within sort of the movie and the film industry, that they are, who I will say is still largely controlled by men, that they are very traditional, formats and plots that they are tied to in terms of what will sell. And that is often the deciding factor.
Yeah.
And so I think the other thing I do, I mean, you're on the show, but almost every woman I meet has a deep, deep, deep desire to tell their story. They recognize the importance of it. They recognize that the struggles that they have been through has not been unique, and they want to share that and largely want to uplift others through their stories. And so I cannot have a show with you without asking your advice to women who want to tell their stories. And I think I want to say, because I also write, not even necessarily, which is what I tell women sometimes, that you tell your own, that you write your own story if you don't have the skill. But I think, how can we start a collective movement of our stories coming out there?
If I knew, I would have started such a movement already. But one of the things I would like to put out there is, if you have ever thought, I'd like to write, nothing comes to mind unless it's there. It's not, you don't think thoughts in a vacuum. We are all born with talent. If your talent is telling story, honor yourself. Embrace who you are. Find a way to tell your story. And if something blocks you, hinders you, get help. I give the UWC address easily because it's public. Magona at uwc.ac.za. The thing is, find a writer, find writers, form a group. It's usually easier and less hectic, less scary to start something, when within a group situation. It's easier because you don't set your own timeline. It's a group thing. It's easier because we are geared for competition. Nobody wants to see writing as a competition, but it is. Because who's going to pick your book and not the other book at the bookstore? Those are the things you learn in a group, and you grow in a group. So find a group, find a writer to come and start you off. Writing is not something that can be taught, but certainly when you work as a group, you can find ways of stepping out of yourself and seeing that you are not unique in being scared. You are not unique in thinking you are too dumb to write a book. I am still surprised. I never thought I would write a book. No. This came to me. It's a gift. Mainly because other people nudged me to do it. And gradually, after a long, long time, I answered the call.
And I want to say, and just before we actually came on set, I was telling Dr. Magona that, how I had come across her was one of her books called Beauty's Gift, which is a great story. But before the story, there was this introduction. And it was not Dr. Magona's first book. But even within that, there was this introduction that just spoke so deeply and so personally about fear of the story, about not feeling like you have the legitimacy to write the story. It was just like a whole narrative on how afraid you were and whether you felt you had the right. Who do you think you are, sort of type of reflection that you had. And I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, wow. And so it's that, right? It's that representation. I'm thinking, wow, if this woman could feel a lack of legitimacy even after she's written so many other books, then the fear and the lack of legitimacy that I'm feeling possibly is normal, possibly is something that can be worked through. Because I am holding the book in my hand anyway.
Yes, there is this, for me, illogical debate. I'm hoping someone can help me understand how we can claim to be one as humanity and then keep on othering. This is not your story. How can I be not you if I want you to be me? Beauty's Gift, most of my writing is provoked out of me. I don't write because, I feel, this, no. But I get angered, saddened, or just filled with the push to do something about a situation I find exceedingly sad. Beauty's gift was provoked by what love costs to people today. The AIDS pandemic hit me to the core. And when I wanted to write about AIDS, then people will say, "Who are you? You are not HIV positive." But how can I have empathy? You want me to be empathetic, right? Yes. You want my support, right? Why is this not my story? In the end, I wrote the book and had the honor for the book to be acclaimed by someone in this country who is the leading anti-AIDS activist, or what, who worked for. And he said it was one of 2 books in this country that addresses the issue well. And for me, writing about issues that eat at us as human beings can never be something that excludes anybody. We are in this together. We are in this together. It's our life. As South Africans, we are one. As people, as human beings in the world, we are one. When we throw garbage at the Big River, that affects people in the Ukraine.
Yeah.
Because the water that comes here, our rivers, our seas, has been through the world and is going to the world. Nobody is a standalone act in the world. But I needed to push myself. I'm not a very courageous person, but the writing has given me some way to deal with my timidity. And I'm grateful.
It's a very powerful statement. Thank you for that. I think a lot of us struggle when we think about courage, whether we are being courageous. And the quote that keeps coming back is, what is it? It's not, courage is not the absence of fear. It's doing it in spite of the fear.
Yes, you will never be without fear. Fear is part of who you are, but you also have to honor the gift you are to the world. And anything says to you, do this, and it's not harming anybody, that's because there's a need for you to do it.
Dr. Magona, I want to ask you before we go about your new book. And so people are saying, I write The Yawning Void. People are saying that it is different to your other books. This one has got a personal edge to it. It is a collection of essays, some which have been published before, some new ones. Some of it speaks to your personal journey. Tell us about this book.
This is a book that came to me, again, via being urged by a professor in Atlanta, Georgia State University, where in April there was a Sindiwe Magona conference, literary conference. Renee Shatman said, "You have written so many essays. Get them published in a book." And I say, "I have." He said, "Yes, you have lots of essays. So where are they?" He says, "Well, they're all over. Collect them." I said, "Well, if you collect them, I'll read them." She did. And the book is divided into 3 sections. Coming into writing, which is where the essay you read belongs, how I started and why I started. And then the middle part is really the core of the book. It's less than 100 pages. If I was a big name in writing, I would just have published that. The yawning void are the issues we as a nation are not dealing with. A void is absence, an absence that is there, glaring at us as a nation, yawning to be filled. we are not doing it. And then the last part is writing about my writing, why each book was written. That's the journey of my writing. The yawning void is something I had to give myself permission to be courageous enough to write. I write about the things that I've been too scared to write about. Race hate. That one, the title is We Are All Racists, and smile about it. It frees everybody. Don't run away from it. We are all racist in the entire world. Everybody. I am a racist. You are a racist. So is everybody. I redefine what racist means and what racialism is. And I hope people read that and talk. You know, race and the hatred we have for one another in this country, that we even made laws. We are not dealing with that. So, and poverty, those are the issues I really talk about, because in this book of essays, because I am praying South Africa will come to its minds collectively as a nation and deal with poverty, with race hate, and the deep-seated fragility within us, so that we can become what we were meant to be.
I love that, and I love that, like all of the admissions about fear and then courage, but also when you talk about this, and we are all racists, so we all, experience that or have some of that inside of us. It makes me think of, in February, masterclass.com during Black History Month, they'd released some of their masterclasses for free, and there was this one that came up for me that I keep going back to again and again. I made so many notes, and it just says, one of the biggest things that we need to do as people of color also is confront the white supremacy inside of ourselves. And it just made me think over and over.
Read my essay.
Dr. Magona, first, we need to have another break. We need to take another break. But we'll be back with more after this. Welcome back. You're still watching The Woman Show, and we are still in studio with Dr. Sindiwe Magona, who is a literary icon. And we had been speaking about your most recent book, I Write the Yawning Void. And Dr. Sindiwe, before we went to the break, you said this book is largely about the things, and especially the middle, I think you said, it's the things that we are not facing in South Africa, which are also things that need to be healed. And I wanted to ask you, in one of the previous interviews that I watched, you said something. You said that this book is for everybody, but it's also for youth. And I just want to read the question here. It is, but for the youth of today, it is to help them understand who gave birth to them, who is raising them, and why they are the way they are. And that really struck me, because a lot of the conversations that we are having now, which is great, we're speaking a lot more around mental health, we are speaking about intergenerational trauma, but it's very taboo also to speak about some of the intergenerational trauma that happened within our families, within our upbringing, within our childhood. We've seen South Africa, just as an example, I think within the last 5 years, make corporal punishment illegal. And what was fascinating for me was the massive backlash by a lot of parents and a lot of people who said, well, I was beaten and I turned out fine and that was okay. I often found within the narrative of gender-based violence, which we cover deeply here, is that before there was an emphasis on gender-based violence, and it was made illegal because at one point it wasn't. At one point it was legal and women were owned, basically. There is a narrative to cover up that pain by saying, well, I turned out okay, or it wasn't that bad. And so we hear these things coming through, and we hear the denialism of the pain. And just circling back to the youth, we hear also about some of the ways our parents raised us. I find that is one of the things that is really difficult to talk about. some of the ways that they raised us that was difficult. And so I wanted to ask you, how important is it for young people to consider the times that their parents grew up in and how that affected their upbringing?
If you want to know yourself, you have to know where you come from. You have struggles in your life now. That is life. No life is without struggling. You have struggled at this generation. The generation before you faced its struggles. What you need to do to grow is to stand up to your struggles and forgive your parents if you feel they owe you anything. Ask them. Have a frank discussion without anger. Try to understand who they are and who they were when they were raising you, knowing that no human being is a saint. Your parents were not, but they raised them, they raised you the way they were raised, because each generation gleans from the one that's raising it, the previous one, what is supposed to be correct, and passes it on. Sometimes there are adaptations done. Is that good or bad? Who knows? Things have to be weighed. What you referred to just now, corporal punishment. I was brought up on corporal punishment. As a teacher, I delivered some of that, although by my time as a teacher, I was becoming enlightened. You had to force me to do it. And once you did, I did it so thoroughly, you never have to do it again. I became ruthless, which now I regret, of course. But I addressed that, the whole thing of change within tradition. I'm not a traditionist, but I also want to say to myself and to others, before you throw away things that were done by by your forebears, examine the reason for that. Because usually, unless you're going to discount them as noodles, as fools, there was a reason for that. And at that time and place, things worked. We have moved. Time moves. There are changes that time cannot but bring. But make sure the reason for that tradition is still addressed. The reason does not change. Obedience and discipline, nothing changes that. Discipline is key to life. You may not want to do corporal punishment. Discard it. What do you put in its stead?
That's very powerful, and I think the example that you gave, because that question was also born out of a quote, where you had said, and I just want to read it because it was so profound, time and space cannot but have an impact on who you are. And you said that in an interview. And it really, with your example right now, it really gave context to there being not a reason for everything, but a reason behind everything that we are not seeing. And when you speak about the corporal punishment and how even then you had to be forced to do it, time and space and thinking about those times also gives us space to forgive ourselves.
I hated corporal punishment because the generation said it's not necessary, it shouldn't be done. But when
you had to do it.
I asked these kids at Fezeka Secondary School, why don't you do my homework? I mean, these are Form 2 people. They say, the other teachers give us corporal punishment, you don't. I said, what? I said, you don't do it tomorrow, you will see, I will give it to you. I brought switches and said, anyone who didn't do, stand that side. That was awful. From then they did my course. I said, I want to show you I can. I choose not to. You force me to, I'll give it to you.
Dr. Magona, we've got 2 minutes left. I just want to ask, and just adding on from, not just the lack of stories, but also access to literature. So I just want to ask you, how do we get access to your literature? Where can we buy your books?
My books are available at all bookshops, honestly. And I was done the favor this year for people in the Eastern Cape, Makanda, the Literary Museum there, Amazwi, on the 29th of September, that's last month, opened a year-long exhibition of my works. You can go there anytime, it's there. But libraries also, if your library doesn't stock works you want, you should ask them. Bookshops too. If they don't have a book, any book, mine or another writer's, any book you want, it's your right to ask the bookshop to order it, the library to order it. But go back and get it.
Yes. Thank you so much for gracing us with your presence and for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, really. I'm grateful.
Thank you. And that brings us to the end of our wonderful conversation. I want to say to you at home, thank you also for joining us. I'm Lenina Dessou. This is Dr. Sindiwe Magona. Goodbye.